It started as a typical Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun spills lazily across the rooftops and the occasional sound of a lawnmower competes with kids playing in backyards. Our neighborhood, Maple Crest Estates, was known for being quiet, well manicured, and ruled by the iron will of the law. At the helm of this homeowners association was Karen Delaney, a woman whose name alone could send shudders through the spines of residents. She enforced lawn height regulations with near military precision, fined people for wind chimes being too loud, and once threatened to evict someone over a mismatched mailbox. But no one, not even in their wildest imaginings, ever thought she'd one day fire a weapon at a medical rescue helicopter. It was around 3:42 p.m. when the noise started. A low whirring at first, almost like a swarm of bees, then growing into the unmistakable thunder of rotor blades slicing through the air. I was on my deck, nursing a glass of iced tea and reading, when the helicopter came into view. It was one of those emergency medical choppers, marked clearly with a red cross and flashing lights, descending rapidly just beyond the tall oaks that bordered my yard. Within seconds, the serenity of suburbia gave way to chaos. The chopper was trying to land in the open greenbelt behind my house, something it had done before. The local EMTs had recently cleared it as a temporary landing zone for emergencies due to a recent spike in traffic accidents near the highway adjacent to the neighborhood. This was the third time this month. I barely registered the significance of the landing anymore. But apparently, Karen did. She lived 2 houses down from mine, her white colonial-style home adorned with precisely clipped hedges and 3 American flags in the front yard, fluttering like warnings rather than symbols of pride. The minute the chopper descended, she came storming out of her house in a bathrobe and slippers, her phone clutched in one hand and what I initially thought was a garden tool in the other. But it wasn't a tool. It was a rifle. No one knows exactly when Karen got the weapon. Some say she'd always had it, tucked away since her late husband passed, maybe a relic of his military days. Others think she bought it recently, after an incident where a teenager on a bike clipped her rose bush and rode off. Regardless, she wasn't hiding it. She stormed across the yard screaming about noise violations, property rights, and aerial trespassing. Her words were almost drowned out by the roar of the chopper, but her gestures were wild and unmistakably aggressive. That's when the first shot rang out. At first, I thought it might have been a firecracker. The sound echoed awkwardly in the open space. But then a second shot followed, sharper, angrier. And then a third. That's when I saw the helicopter jolt slightly midair, and I realized with horror that she wasn't just firing into the air, she was aiming at it. The aircraft veered abruptly to the left, then hovered in place, lights strobing as the pilot tried to reassess the landing. People began spilling out of their homes, drawn by the unmistakable gunfire. Someone yelled, "She's got a gun!" And I instinctively dropped behind the wooden slats of my deck. I peeked through the railing, heart pounding, and saw her waving the rifle at the chopper like it was a giant bird encroaching on her territory. She shouted something about the noise driving her cats insane and how the WA rules explicitly forbade non-approved air traffic. As if that somehow gave her legal ground to fire live rounds at a federally operated medical rescue vehicle. The police were on site within minutes, our neighborhood being under the jurisdiction of a well-funded suburban district. But even before they arrived, the helicopter pulled back, managing to stabilize itself before heading off in a new direction, apparently rerouted to a different landing site. I later found out that the patient on board was a 10-year-old boy from a car crash. The delay caused by the shooting incident didn't kill him, but it did result in critical complications. Karen didn't resist arrest, at least not in the way you'd expect. She sat on her porch, sipping something from a pink Yeti tumbler, still in her bathrobe. When the officers approached, she greeted them as if they were dinner guests, casually explaining how she was within her rights to defend her property from unauthorized incursions, whether on foot or by air. The absurdity of her calm tone, paired with the still smoking rifle resting on the table next to her, made the scene feel like a dark satire. But things escalated quickly from there. The moment the local police realized she had fired upon a federally operated aircraft, the case was kicked up the chain. ATF agents were on the scene by nightfall. Within 24 hours, Karen was no longer just the tyrannical neighborhood enforcer. She was a wanted felon, accused of endangering the lives of emergency personnel, discharging a firearm within city limits, and attempting to sabotage a federal rescue mission. The news broke like wildfire. Local stations aired helicopter footage of the incident, zooming in on the bullet holes in the tail of the aircraft. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #HoKaren and #SuburbanSniper trended for days. Memes were made. Someone even created a parody HOA rulebook called Karen's Commandments, filled with absurd ordinances like no rescue vehicles before 5 p.m. and no medical emergencies on weekends. The community was in shock. Some residents came forward to speak in Karen's defense, citing her years of service to the HOA and her firm but fair approach to neighborhood order. But most of us were simply trying to wrap our heads around how a woman so obsessed with enforcing trivial regulations could go so far off the rails. It wasn't like she'd been completely unhinged, she was just strict, meticulous, intensely rule-oriented. Looking back, maybe that was the warning sign. Karen wasn't just someone who liked rules, she was someone who needed control. The helicopter, loud and chaotic and unsanctioned by her beloved HOA bylaws, represented everything she couldn't manage. So she did what she always did, she tried to enforce her will. But this time, the price of control wasn't a $50 fine or a passive-aggressive email. This time, it was federal charges, a community in panic, and a moment of violence that could have easily turned tragic. The neighborhood hasn't quite recovered. The HOA board dissolved within days of the incident, and the bylaws are being rewritten by a city-appointed mediator. Karen's house sits empty now, caution tape fluttering in the wind like ghostly streamers. But the echoes of her actions still hang in the air, like the sound of those first shots, sharp and surreal, cutting through an otherwise perfect suburban afternoon. Sure. Here's an expanded part 2 of the story. Karen shot at a rescue helicopter over my backyard. Now she's wanted by federal agents, continuing in a narrative style and reaching around 1,000 words. The buzzing of the rotor blades had barely faded when the chaos began. At first, I thought the shots were fireworks, some leftover stash being irresponsibly set off. But the sharp cracks and the way everyone dove for cover told me otherwise. And then I saw her. Karen, standing at the edge of her meticulously trimmed lawn, her rifle still aimed skyward, smoke curling from the barrel like something out of a damn western. The helicopter had already disappeared beyond the line of oaks behind my house, banking hard and fast as it escaped the trajectory of whatever madness Karen had just unleashed. It had come to our neighborhood responding to an emergency, an injured mountain biker who'd taken a bad fall in the hills behind us. He was supposed to be airlifted to the trauma center. The situation was life or death. And she fired at them. I ducked behind my shed, pulling my phone from my pocket, hands trembling as I called 911. My voice cracked as I tried to explain what I'd seen, watching through a gap in the fence as Karen marched back to her porch like she'd just done the community a favor. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, Karen had already vanished into her house, shutters drawn, security lights flipping on like flood lamps in anticipation of a siege. The officers surrounded her home, issuing commands through a loudspeaker, but there was no response. Not from Karen, and not from her husband, Dale, who, rumor had it, hadn't been seen since last Thanksgiving. The last anyone knew, he'd been away on business, but that excuse had worn thin. Some said he'd left her. Others whispered that he hadn't left at all. The news broke within the hour. A local channel got a hold of my Ring camera footage that caught her firing at the helicopter, and from there, everything spiraled. The footage went viral. Karen shoots at rescue chopper. Splashed across every social media platform within a day. I didn't want to be involved. I didn't even want the attention. But reporters began camping out on our street like it was the scene of a murder trial. They interviewed everyone, even the pizza delivery kid who claimed Karen once screamed at him for parking on the community curb without written HOA approval. But this wasn't HOA pettiness anymore. This was a federal crime. Within 48 hours, the FBI and the FAA got involved. Interfering with a rescue operation and discharging a firearm at a registered aircraft was no joke. A federal warrant was issued for her arrest. The feds showed up in dark SUVs with government plates, speaking in clipped tones and wearing expressions that suggested they were both annoyed and bewildered to be in suburbia. They cordoned off her house. A negotiator tried to make contact. Still, nothing. Karen had gone silent. I watched the whole thing unfold from my upstairs window, heart pounding. I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of disbelief and guilt. I had complained about Karen before, sure, plenty of times. The time she fined me $75 for leaving my garbage bin visible for more than the permitted 22 minutes. Or when she demanded my daughter repaint her lemonade stand to match HOA-approved color palettes. But no one, not even me, could have predicted this kind of escalation. What we didn't know then was that Karen had been planning something for weeks. One of the agents later told me that they found survivalist gear in her garage. Cases of dehydrated meals, boxes of ammunition, printed maps of local power grids. The woman wasn't just paranoid, she was preparing for war. And the rescue helicopter. She thought it was a government drone surveilling her. She believed the HOA was part of a wider conspiracy against her freedom. That's what she told the negotiators in a single, cryptic note she slid under her door. But before they could act on any of it, she disappeared again. 2 days later, her house was found empty. The back gate had been cut open with bolt cutters, and security footage from the walking trail behind our neighborhood showed her slipping through the woods at 3 a.m. dressed in full camo, dragging a hiking pack bigger than she was. Authorities followed her trail as far as the creek bed outside the city, but then they lost her. That's when the real panic started. People started wondering what she'd do next. A woman who had no issue opening fire on a rescue chopper might not have any qualms about other acts of violence. Her name was added to a federal wanted list. Armed and dangerous. Neighborhood watch meetings tripled in attendance. Some residents even moved out temporarily. The HOA board issued an emergency statement suspending all fines, inspections, and enforcement, probably the first piece we'd had from them in years. But Karen wasn't done. 3 days after she went missing, a drone, one of those cheap ones you can buy at a department store, buzzed into the neighborhood and hovered over the HOA office. It dropped a small cardboard package onto the roof. Inside, they found a letter. Written in her tight, furious handwriting, it read, "This was only the beginning. You can't find your way out of this." The letter was signed simply, K. It wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. And it terrified everyone. The local sheriff said he believed Karen was still nearby, living off-grid in the hills behind the town, waiting for something. No one was sure what that something was. Some speculated she was trying to find allies online in fringe forums. Others thought she might try to strike at the HOA headquarters downtown, or worse, take hostages. Every neighbor now walked with their heads on a swivel. Every drone or unusual noise overhead sent people scrambling for cover. And me. I regretted ever complaining about her flowerbed violations. Because now, my house, my literal backyard, had been the epicenter of something dark and bizarre, and I wasn't sure it was over. Not by a long shot.